Hi, I'm P. Andrew Sandlin, founder and president of the Center for Cultural Leadership. As an independent scholar, I own thousands of books, many of them remarkable, some rare, quite interesting. None perhaps as theologically interesting, certainly from a sociological standpoint, as Kiersa Blake's 1925 book, Religion of Yesterday and Tomorrow. There it is, title page. Lake was a Harvard scholar. This book, as I said, published in 1925. He was one of the old line theological liberals, denying the great fundamentals of the faith, like the infallibility of the Bible, the deity of Jesus Christ, his bodily resurrection, and so on. The book is not interesting for that reason. There's a lot of liberal stuff in the air at the time. The book is interesting for another reason. In one of the early chapters, he lays out a sociology within the church at the time, the church broadly considered, by identifying three particular groups battling within the church. They are what he calls the fundamentalists, the experimentalists, and the institutionalists. Now, by fundamentalists, he means what we would generally say identifies the orthodox, that is, those that hold to historic biblical Christianity, the great early creeds, Reformation confessions, the genuine biblical faith. By the experimentalists, he meant what we would call the liberals or the modernists, those who are attempting to adjust the faith, to change it to suit the apostate modern situation. He called them experimentalists because the important thing for them is the experience of the faith, and also another shade of that meaning, experimentalism, that they're willing to experiment with what the faith is rather than continue embracing and championing the faith once for all delivered. But most interestingly is this third category, that is the institutionalists. By the institutionalists, for whom he has great contempt, I might add, he himself is a liberal but has contempt for the institutionalists. The institutionalists are the people within the large denominations, within the church at large, who have basic sympathy with the conservatives, but whose principal concern is not with the Bible or the fundamentals of the faith as such, but with preserving and perpetuating and growing their particular institution. Kiersa Blake rightly understands that within a particular religious body, orthodoxy and liberalism cannot coexist forever. He was quite prophetic about that, by the way. By the 1930s or so, almost all the Orthodox, certainly the most vocal ones, had left or been forced out of these major denominations, except for exceptions like the Southern Baptist Convention. And they were the stronghold of liberals. And that's why today, theological modernism or liberalism, more broadly experimentalism, has control of all the mainline denominations. There have been some revival of orthodoxy in some of them, and goals to launch a genuine reformation of orthodoxy. The late Tom Oden was in favor of that, and there have been various others. But by and large, these denominations, the United Methodists in general, the United Church of Christ, the United Presbyterian Church, I think it's called the PCUSA now, and many others, are essentially given over in an official capacity to liberalism. There may be and are sound churches within these groups, but they're in the minority. The objective of the institutionalists was to keep this institutional consensus, which included both the Orthodox and the liberals or modernists, the experimentalists, because for them the important thing was the preservation of the institution itself. Well, I'd like to update this taxonomy and to think about it in today's terms. Every major denomination. Every large church and large Christian ministry has each of these three. I'm speaking generally, of course. There are the Orthodox who believe the Bible. There are the liberals and modernists who are willing to adjust the Bible to a modern situation, and they're the institutionalists who want to keep both within because they want to preserve this sort of synthetic unity. Today, I should mention that what we call liberalism and modernism is not essentially over any specific fundamental doctrines. The great battle today is not over the deity of Christ and his bodily resurrection. Liberals don't believe that, of course, but liberalism today is manifested most flagrantly and vocally in a deviation from biblical ethics, in the support, for example, of Pride Month, same-sex marriage. Of course, it's not really marriage. Aborticide, known more euphemistically as abortion. Opposition to so-called white privilege. Radical feminism. Socialism. Cultural Marxism. That's essentially what the ecclesial liberals within the churches, that's the platform on which they're standing. Not specifically a repudiation of the early creeds. That ship sailed a long time ago. I would say increasingly this is true of erstwhile large conservative churches, denominations, seminaries, Presbyterian Church in America, and the so-called Revoice Conference in Missouri, asking for tolerance for same-sex attraction and perhaps even homosexuality within the church. And in the Southern Baptist Convention just a few weeks ago, as I'm making this recording, pointing out the legitimacy of so-called critical theory, which grew out of Germany, Marcuse, Erich Fromm, Adorno, Horkheimer, the cultural Marxists of the time who influenced Western culture through their teaching at American universities like Brandeis and Stanford and Columbia, and so on, brought here by John Dewey in a pile of money. They were the intellectuals that tended to contribute to the radical deviation in the 60s, and now their views have a foothold in the Southern Baptist Convention, which did find it in its heart, however, in one of its planks to say all of this teaching has to be subject to the Bible. That really was quite a laugher. It's just like saying rape and bank robbery are permissible as long as they're subject to the Bible. Critical theory is intentionally subversive of Christianity and Christian culture, always has. Go back and read what those writers said at the time. But the institutionalists are committed specifically to preserving the unity in denominations, large churches, denominations, and so on, for the sake of the preservation of the church denomination or Christian ministry. They're dangerous for that reason because their principal concern is not adherence to biblical truth. Their principal concern is the perpetuation of their institution. That's what they're giving their life for. That, more than anything, it seems, is what they would die for. Not hardcore biblical truth, which does have rough edges at times. We're called to speak the truth in love and have great love for our brothers and sisters, no doubt about it, but we must speak the truth. But the institutionalists are not concerned most with speaking the truth, and therefore they will do anything to blunt the edges of the Orthodox and try to persuade them and use political maneuvers. And the institutionalists are quite skilled at political maneuvering within the church to preserve the church and its institution. Try to keep everyone together, and eventually institutions like this are lost to the faith. Incidentally, that's precisely what happened after 1925 when Lake's book was published in virtually all of the mainline denominations, in the Episcopal Church, United Church of Christ, the United Presbyterian Church, now the PC USA, United Methodist Church, though recently did take a good stand on same-sex marriage with a great deal of pushback by its modernist, liberal, unbelieving churches. For this reason, the institutionalists are pernicious. If you belong to a large Christian ministry, a church, or a group that is willing to allow both the Orthodox and the modernists to coexist, and to coexist peacefully, you're on a fool's errand. Lake himself, being a liberal, said that. He said it's not possible over time for these two groups to coexist within a church or denomination. One of them will win out. And they did. Aside from the Southern Baptist Convention, there were no other examples, to my knowledge, of large denominations that remain true to the faith. They're all given over to liberalism and apostasy. And as Machen said years ago, liberalism is not a variant of Christianity. It's just not Christianity. And this new form of liberalism, which supports same-sex, so-called same-sex marriage, it's not really marriage, and aborticide, and socialism and radical feminism, and a new form of liberal racism, attacks on white privilege and toxic masculinity and so forth. When those become officially enshrined, and as they become officially enshrined in those churches, they're no longer Christian. We need to say that. And the attempt to keep this utterly false teaching, destructive of the faith, within the bounds of a church is to betray the faith, and that's what the institutionalists often do. It's treason within the church. As John Warwick Montgomery once said tragically, with hard language, but true, damned within the church. I would urge you, if you're a part of a church or large Christian ministry denomination that has institutionalists who are committed to preserving this kind of false synthetic syncretism of the truth and falsehood, falsehood will always win out. The goal of truth is expel falsehood or leave. That's the biblical approach. So beware of the institutionalists. Stand for the truth. Stand graciously, with great love in your heart, but stand for the truth no matter what the cost. I'm P. Andrew Sandlin, Center for Cultural Leadership, Christian Culture.